Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I work the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, mostly in the Shenandoah Valley where the mountains roll like green waves and the hollers run deep and dark between them. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened on Devil's Backbone Ridge in October of 1974. The official reports will tell you it was a gas leak and unstable ground. That's what they had to write. But I was there. I know what I saw. I'm 41 years old, been through Vietnam, and I grew up in coal country down in West Virginia. My daddy worked the mines, and so did my brother Danny, until a tunnel caved in on him when I was 19. That's why I know mines, know their sounds and smells, and the way they feel when something's not right. It's also why I never wanted anything to do with holes in the ground again. But sometimes the job takes you places you don't want to go. It was October 13th when the call came in. 3 geology students from Virginia Tech had gone missing near the old Shenandoah Coal Company site up on Devil's Backbone. Their professor called it in when they didn't return from what was supposed to be a 2-day field study. The mine had been sealed since 1902, after an explosion killed 127 miners. The bodies were never recovered. Too dangerous to go back in, they said. Just sealed it up and left those men down there in the dark. I drove up the old mining road in my Park Service truck, radio crackling with static from the mountains. The October air was sharp and cold, and fog was rolling in from the valleys like something alive. The leaves were turning, reds and yellows bright against the gray sky. The road was barely a road anymore, just 2 ruts through the trees with weeds growing up the middle. It took me an hour to get to where the students had parked their Jeep. I found their camp about 50 yards from the old mine entrance. 3 tents, still set up but flapping in the wind. The fire pit was cold, looked like it hadn't been used in days. Their gear was scattered around like they'd left in a hurry. I called out their names: Sarah Chen, Mike Rodriguez, Tom Bradley, nothing but my voice echoing off the rocks. The sealed mine entrance was about 100 feet away, a concrete wall built right into the mountainside with "Danger, Do Not Enter" painted in faded red letters. But something was wrong with the seal. There was a hole in it, big enough for a person to crawl through. Fresh concrete chunks lay on the ground. I walked over to take a look, and that's when I felt it for the first time. The temperature dropped like I'd walked into a freezer. My breath started puffing out in little clouds. The air smelled wrong too, not just the usual coal dust and damp rock you'd expect from an old mine. This smelled like something had died and been left to rot. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it through the hole. The beam disappeared into absolute darkness. But as I stood there, I could have sworn I heard something. Faint, so faint I almost missed it. It sounded like singing. Old songs, the kind my grandmother used to hum while she cooked. Welsh songs from the old country. I stepped back from the hole, and the temperature went back to normal. The singing stopped. I told myself it was just wind through the tunnels, playing tricks. But my hands were shaking as I went back to search the campsite. That's when I found the notebooks. The students had been documenting everything: rock samples, geological formations, and sketches of tunnel layouts. But the tunnel maps didn't match anything that should have been there. According to their drawings, there were passages going deeper into the mountain than any coal operation would have dug. Some of the sketches showed chambers big enough to hold a church. At the bottom of one page, someone had written in shaky handwriting, "They're still down there, still working, still singing." The sun was getting low, and the fog was getting thicker. I knew I should call for backup, wait for a proper rescue team. But those kids had been missing for 3 days. If they were hurt and trapped down there, time mattered. I went back to my truck and got my gear. Cave rescue equipment, first aid kit, extra batteries, and my MSA breathing apparatus in case of bad air. I also grabbed my CB radio, though I doubted it would work underground. Before I went in, I called dispatch one more time, told them where I was and what I was doing. The radio crackled and popped, but I got through. "Be careful, Ranger Whitmore," came the voice through the static. "Weather's moving in. We might lose contact." I looked up at the darkening sky, then back at that hole in the concrete wall. Every instinct I had told me not to go down there. But those kids were counting on me. I squeezed through the hole and into the darkness. The tunnel beyond the seal was bigger than I expected. My flashlight beam showed rough-hewn walls and old wooden support beams that looked ready to collapse. The air was thick and cold, with that same wrong smell I'd noticed outside. I followed fresh footprints in the coal dust, 3 sets of hiking boots heading deeper into the mine. The students had definitely come this way. The main tunnel split into 3 passages about 50 feet in. The footprints went left, so I followed them. My radio was already picking up nothing but static, just like I figured it would. The tunnel sloped down at a gentle angle, and the walls started showing signs of old mining work. Tool marks from pickaxes, places where they'd blasted through rock. But some of the marks looked fresh, like someone had been working here recently. That's when I heard the singing again. It was clearer now, echoing from somewhere ahead of me. Definitely Welsh, definitely old mining songs. My grandmother had sung them to me when I was little, told me they were songs the miners used to sing to keep their spirits up in the darkness. But who was singing them down here? I called out again. Sarah, Mike, Tom, can you hear me? The singing stopped immediately. The silence that followed was complete and heavy, like the mountain was holding its breath. I kept walking, following the footprints. The tunnel curved to the right, and my light caught something on the ground. A backpack. It was open, and gear was spilled out: rope, carabiners, a camp stove. No blood, but everything was scattered like someone had dropped it and run. A little further on, I found Sarah's jacket hung on a support beam. It was torn, 3 long tears through the fabric that looked like claw marks. My heart started beating faster. Bears didn't come into mines, and even if one did, it wouldn't tear fabric like that. The marks were too clean, too precise. The tunnel opened up into a larger chamber, and that's where I found the first body. Mike Rodriguez was sitting against the far wall, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. At first, I thought he was just scared, maybe hurt. But when I got closer and my flashlight hit him full on, I saw the truth. He was dead. Had been for a while, from the look of him. But there wasn't a mark on his body, no wounds, no blood. He just looked like he'd sat down and died of fright. His hands were clutched around something. I pried his fingers open and found a piece of paper, a note, written in his handwriting. They want us to work. They won't let us leave. The foreman says we have to meet our quota. But we're not miners. We don't know how. I looked around the chamber with new eyes. There were old mining tools scattered around. Pickaxes, shovels, carbide lamps. Some of them looked like they'd been used recently. The walls showed fresh tool marks, and there were piles of freshly dug coal near the far end of the chamber. But who was doing the digging? That's when I noticed the cold spots. Places where the temperature dropped 20 degrees for no reason. And in those cold spots, I could see my breath forming little clouds that moved against the still air like something was breathing them out. The singing started again, much closer this time. Multiple voices, harmonizing in Welsh. And underneath the singing, I could hear other sounds. The ring of pickaxes against rock, the scrape of shovels, the creak of minecarts. But I couldn't see anyone. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But I still had to find Sarah and Tom. I couldn't leave without them. The sounds were getting louder, the temperature was dropping, and something else was happening. The shadows in the chamber were moving wrong. They were moving independently of my flashlight beam, shifting and swirling like they had their own light source. That's when I saw the first one clearly. A man in old-fashioned mining clothes, covered in coal dust, carrying a pickaxe. He was translucent, like looking at someone through frosted glass. The carbide lamp on his hat glowed with a sickly yellow light. He walked right past me like I wasn't there, heading for one of the working areas. He swung his pickaxe at the wall, and when it hit, sparks flew, and real chips of rock broke away. Then another one appeared. And another. Soon the whole chamber was full of them. Dozens of ghostly miners, working away like they had been for 72 years. They moved with purpose, like they were trying to complete some important job that was long overdue. I stood frozen, watching them work. Part of my brain was trying to find a rational explanation, but most of me knew I was seeing something impossible. One of the ghosts turned and looked right at me. He was young, maybe 20, with kind eyes and a face covered in coal dust. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. "This is our shift. We have quotas to meet." I found my voice somehow. "I'm looking for 3 students. College kids. Have you seen them?" The ghost tilted his head like he was thinking. "The ones who took pictures?" The foreman wasn't happy about that, said it wasn't allowed. "Where are they?" "Deeper. In the new workings." "But mister, you don't want to go down there." The foreman, he's been angry since the cave-in. Real angry. And when someone disturbs the work. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I knew I had to keep going, but every part of me wanted to run. These weren't evil spirits. I could tell that much. They were just miners, doing what miners do. But there was something else down here. Something that had killed Mike and taken the other 2 students. I headed for the passage that led deeper into the mountain, following the only other set of fresh footprints I could find. Behind me, the ghostly miners kept working, their pickaxes ringing against stone, their voices raised in songs as old as the mountains themselves. The deeper tunnel was different from the others. The walls were rougher, like they'd been dug in a hurry, and the support beams were newer. Some of them still had bark on them. This wasn't part of the original mine. Someone, or something, had been expanding it. The footprints I was following belonged to Sarah and Tom. They stuck close together, which told me they were scared when they came through here. Every 50 feet or so, I found something they'd dropped: a water bottle, a pencil, a granola bar wrapper, like they were leaving a trail. The temperature kept dropping as I went deeper. My breath was coming out in thick clouds now, and ice was forming on the tunnel walls. That wasn't natural. Even in the coldest Virginia winter, it wouldn't be freezing this far underground. The singing was all around me now, echoing from passages I couldn't see. Different groups of miners, all working their shifts, all trying to finish jobs that had been interrupted 72 years ago. But underneath their songs, I could hear something else: orders being shouted in a harsh voice, the crack of a whip, and sometimes screaming. I came to another chamber, bigger than the first one. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls, but I could see activity everywhere. More ghostly miners, digging and hauling and working with desperate intensity. And I could see why they were desperate. Standing in the center of the chamber was a man in a black suit and bowler hat. He was solid, not translucent like the others, and the cold seemed to radiate out from him like heat from a fire. He carried a clipboard and a pocket watch, and when he shouted orders, his voice echoed from every wall. "Faster," he bellowed. "The company wants 50 tons by shift's end. Any man who doesn't meet quota stays for the next shift." This had to be the foreman the young ghost had mentioned. And I was starting to understand what had happened here. When the mine exploded in 1902, it hadn't just killed the miners. It had trapped them, kept them working, under the command of a foreman who'd probably been just as cruel in life as he was in death. They'd been down here for 72 years, trying to complete an impossible task, never allowed to rest. And now they had fresh workers. I saw Tom first. He was swinging a pickaxe at the far wall, but his movements were clumsy and desperate. His clothes were torn and dirty, and even from a distance I could see he was crying. Every few swings, one of the ghost miners would come over and show him the proper technique, their faces sad and sympathetic. Sarah was 20 feet away, shoveling coal into an old mining cart. She was in better shape than Tom, but she kept looking over her shoulder at the foreman like a scared animal. I started toward them, but the temperature dropped so fast I could barely breathe. The foreman's head snapped around and his eyes, black pits in his pale face, locked onto mine. "Another worker," he said, and his voice made my bones ache. "Good, we're behind quota, thanks to these lazy students." The ghost miners all stopped working and turned to look at me. Their faces were full of warning and fear. "You don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here to take them home. They're not miners." The foreman laughed, and the sound echoed through the chamber like falling rocks. "Everyone who enters the mine is a miner, company rules, and everyone works until the job is done." He started walking toward me, and with each step the air got colder. Ice was forming on my jacket, and my flashlight beam was getting dimmer. "Sarah, Tom," I shouted, "we need to go, now." They both looked up, hope flooding their faces. But when they tried to move toward me, ghost miners stepped in their way. Not threatening, just sad and apologetic. "Can't," said one of them, an older man with a gray beard. "Foreman's rules. Once you're on shift, you don't leave until the work's done." "And the work is never done," whispered another. The foreman was getting closer. I could see details now that made my stomach turn. His skin was waxy and pale, his fingernails were black, and there were coal stains around his mouth like he'd been eating the stuff. "Your friends disturbed our operation," he said, "taking pictures, making noise, asking questions. That's not how mining works. Mining requires discipline, order, respect for authority." I backed toward the tunnel, but I could hear footsteps behind me. More miners, blocking my escape route. "I have equipment," I said desperately. "Breathing apparatus, safety gear. If you let them go, I can help make the work safer." "Safety?" The foreman spat, and black liquid splattered on the ground. "There is no safety in mining. There is only work and more work until the earth gives up her treasures. These children need to learn that," Sarah screamed. One of the ghost miners was trying to show her how to hold the shovel properly, but his translucent hands kept passing through hers. The frustration on both their faces was horrible to see. That's when I remembered my grandmother's songs. Without really thinking about it, I started humming one of the Welsh lullabies she used to sing to me, a simple melody about going home after a long day's work. The effect was immediate. Every ghost in the chamber stopped what they were doing and turned to listen. The foreman's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, recognition, and then something that might have been fear. "How do you know that song?" he demanded. "My grandmother taught it to me," I said, still humming. "She said it was for miners, to help them remember what they were working for." Some of the younger ghosts started crying, actual tears that sparkled in my flashlight beam. The older ones began humming along, their voices joining mine in harmonies that filled the chamber with warmth. "Enough," the foreman shouted, but his voice was weaker now. "Back to work, all of you." But the miners weren't listening to him anymore. They were listening to the song, remembering something they'd forgotten, and one by one, they started moving toward the tunnels that led up and out of the mine. "You can't leave," the foreman screamed. "The work isn't done, the company demands." "The company's been dead for 70 years, said the gray-bearded miner. "And so have we. Time we acted like it." The foreman lunged at me, his black fingernails reaching for my throat. But 3 of the ghost miners stepped between us, and their combined presence drove him back. "Take the young ones and go," the graybeard told me. "We'll keep him busy, but hurry, he gets stronger in the deep places." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed Sarah and Tom, both of them crying with relief, and headed for the tunnel as fast as I could move. Behind us, the foreman was screaming curses in a language that might have been Welsh, or might have been something older and darker. The ghost miners were surrounding him, but I could feel his anger growing, turning the air around us sharp and bitter. We ran through the tunnels, following my own footprints back toward the surface. But the mine seemed different now, like it was fighting us. Passages that should have led up instead went down. Tunnels that I remembered being straight now curved and twisted. And always, behind us, I could hear the foreman's voice getting closer. We'd been running for what felt like hours, but the tunnels kept changing. Every time I thought we were heading for the surface, we'd end up in a new chamber I'd never seen before. The mine was like a living thing, reshaping itself to keep us trapped. Sarah was struggling to keep up. She'd been down here for 3 days, working with minimal food and water. Tom was in even worse shape. The ghost miners had been trying to teach him proper technique, but his hands were raw and bleeding from the unfamiliar tools. "This isn't right," I said, stopping at another junction I didn't recognize. "We should have reached the surface by now." "He's changing the mine," Sarah whispered. "The foreman, he can move the tunnels around, create new ones, seal off the old ones. That's how they've been expanding the operation." "For how long?" "Since 1902. Every time someone gets lost in these mountains, every time a hiker or hunter disappears, they end up down here. He's been building his workforce for 70 years. That explained the fresh tool marks, the new passages, the recently dug coal. It wasn't just the original 127 miners trapped down here. It was everyone who'd ever wandered too close to Devil's Backbone Ridge. A sound echoed through the tunnels, the crack of a whip and the foreman's voice shouting orders. He was close now, and he was bringing friends. "This way," Tom said suddenly, pointing to a narrow passage I hadn't noticed. "Mike and I found this earlier. It goes straight up." We squeezed through the opening and started climbing. The passage was steep and slippery, more like a natural cave than a mine tunnel. My flashlight showed handholds carved into the rock, and here and there I could see older carvings. Names and dates going back decades. J. Thompson, 1943. Mary Ellen Foster, 1958. Kevin Walsh, 1967. All the missing persons from the area, all the unsolved disappearances. They'd all ended up here, all been put to work in the eternal mine. We climbed for 20 minutes before we hit the wall. Solid rock, blocking the passage completely. But this wasn't natural. I could see tool marks where someone had deliberately sealed the tunnel. He knows, Sarah said, her voice hollow with despair. He knows we're here. The temperature started dropping again. Our breath came out in clouds, and ice began forming on the walls. From below us came the sound of footsteps, lots of them, climbing up through the narrow passage. I pulled out my radio and tried to call for help, but all I got was static, mixed with voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. The radio waves were being twisted somehow, carrying messages from miners who'd been dead for decades. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A child's voice, crying for his mother. How many? I asked Sarah. I don't know. Hundreds maybe. People have been disappearing around here for as long as anyone can remember. The foreman, he doesn't just take adults. He takes anyone who wanders into his territory. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear the foreman's voice now, echoing up from the depths. You cannot escape the mine. The mountain owns you now. You will work until the earth releases her treasures. I looked at the tool marks on the wall blocking our path. They were fresh, but not too fresh. Made within the last few days, probably by someone trying to escape just like we were. Stand back, I said, and pulled out the emergency explosives from my cave rescue kit. Small charges, designed to clear rockfalls. I'd never used them in a space this small, but we were out of options. Are you crazy? Tom asked. You'll bring the whole mountain down on us. Maybe, but staying here means working for him forever. I'd rather take my chances. I set the charges against the wall and lit the fuses. We pressed ourselves against the sides of the passage and covered our heads. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Rock dust filled the air, and for a moment I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. But when the dust cleared, I could see light ahead. Real light, not the sickly glow of carbide lamps. We squeezed through the gap I'd blasted and found ourselves in a natural cave system. And there, maybe 50 feet ahead, was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. Daylight filtering down through a crack in the rocks. But the foreman wasn't done with us yet. The temperature plummeted so fast that frost formed on my eyebrows. The light from the crack grew dim, like something was blocking it from above. And behind us, I could hear him climbing through the passage we'd just escaped from. You think you can steal my workers? His voice was right behind us now. You think you can destroy company property and just walk away? I turned around and there he was, squeezing through the gap in the rocks. But he was different now. Bigger, more solid, with eyes like burning coals and fingernails that had grown into claws. Run, I told Sarah and Tom. Get to the surface. Send help. We're not leaving you, Sarah said. You have to. Someone needs to tell the world what's down here. Someone needs to warn people. The foreman was fully in the cave now, and he was growing larger with each step. His shadow covered the walls, and where it touched, the rock began to crack and crumble. 72 years, he said, his voice like grinding stone. 72 years of work, and we're still behind quota. Do you know what that means for a foreman's record? I started singing again, the same Welsh lullaby that had helped us before. But this time it was different. This time, I wasn't just humming, I was singing the words, the ones my grandmother had taught me in her broken English. It was a song about rest, about laying down your tools at the end of the day and going home to your family, about the peace that comes when the work is finally done. The foreman stopped growing and began to shrink, his face twisted with rage and something else, longing. No, he whispered, the work is never done, never finished. The company demands. The company's gone, I said, still singing. The mine is closed. The work is over. You can rest now. For just a moment, his face changed. The cruel lines softened, and I saw what he might have looked like in life. A tired man, driven by quotas and deadlines, who'd forgotten what he was working for. But then the moment passed, and the rage came back stronger than ever. "If I can't have my workers," he snarled, "then no one leaves." He raised his hands, and the cave began to collapse around us. The ceiling came down like thunder. I threw myself forward, covering Sarah and Tom as best I could, as tons of rock crashed down behind us. The foreman's scream echoed through the collapsing cave, a sound of pure fury and defeat. When the dust settled, we were trapped in a pocket of space maybe 6 feet wide. The crack that had been letting in daylight was completely blocked. But I could hear something that gave me hope, voices from above, calling our names. The explosion had been heard on the surface. A rescue team was coming. It took them 6 hours to dig us out. 6 hours of lying in that cramped space, listening to the sound of drills and shovels, watching our flashlight batteries die one by one. But we made it out alive. Sarah and Tom were rushed to the hospital. Dehydration, exhaustion, exposure, but nothing that wouldn't heal. They never talked about what they saw down in the mine, not publicly. The official report blamed the whole thing on gas leaks and unstable ground. Mike's body was recovered 3 days later, when they sent in a properly equipped team. "Heart failure," the coroner said. "No signs of violence or struggle. Just a healthy 20-year-old who died of fright." I wrote my real report that night, every detail I could remember. But when I tried to file it, my supervisor just shook his head. "Nobody's going to believe this, Jim. You want to tell people that a ghost foreman killed a college student and tried to enslave 3 others in an abandoned mine? They'll have you committed." He was right, of course. So the official report went out with the gas leak explanation, and my real report went into a filing cabinet where it would never see daylight. But there were a few things that couldn't be covered up. The mine entrance was sealed again, this time with steel and concrete that would take dynamite to break through. Warning signs were posted, and the old mining road was blocked off permanently. The geological survey team found something interesting when they mapped the collapsed tunnels. The mine was 3 times larger than the original blueprints showed. 70 years of expansion, all done by hand, all in the service of meeting an impossible quota set by a company that no longer existed. And in the deepest chambers, they found evidence of dozens of campsites, personal belongings dating back to the 1942. All the missing persons from the area, everyone who'd ever vanished near Devil's Backbone Ridge. They'd all been put to work. I put in for a transfer 2 weeks later. Couldn't stand being in those mountains anymore, knowing what was buried underneath them. The service sent me out to Yellowstone, where the only holes in the ground are natural ones, and the only ghosts are in tourist stories. But I still hear them sometimes, in my dreams. The voices of those miners, singing their Welsh songs in the darkness, still working shifts that ended 72 years ago. Still, trying to meet quotas set by cruel men who never understood that some things are more important than productivity. The local people know, of course. They've always known. That's why they call it Devil's Backbone Ridge, why they tell their children to stay away from the old mine sites. They know that some places hold on to the dead, especially places where people died angry and unfulfilled. The mine is sealed now, but that doesn't mean it's empty. On foggy October nights, locals report seeing lights deep underground, moving through tunnels that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, when the wind is right, you can hear singing echoing up from the depths. Old songs. Welsh mining songs about work and brotherhood and the hope of going home at the end of a long shift. I hope they find their way home eventually. All of them, the original 127, and everyone who got trapped down there after. I hope they finally get to lay down their tools and rest. But I'm not going back to check on them. Some doors, once you close them, should stay closed forever. My name is James Whitmore, and that's what really happened on Devil's Backbone Ridge in October of 1974. Believe it or don't believe it, that's up to you. But if you're ever hiking in the Shenandoah Mountains and you hear singing coming from underground, do yourself a favor. Walk the other way. My name is Margaret O'Sullivan, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. I studied cave biology, got my PhD, and thought I knew everything about what lives underground. I was wrong. People around Jefferson National Forest always told stories about things in the caves. Cherokee legends talked about Uk-10, serpent demons that lived in the deep places. Local folks would whisper about cavers who went down and never came back up. I always smiled and nodded, the way you do when someone tells you about Bigfoot or UFOs. I'm Irish Catholic, raised to believe in mysteries, but I'm also a scientist. I need proof. For 13 years, I studied bats and cave fish and blind salamanders. I mapped tunnels and measured water levels. I never found anything that shouldn't be there. Until February 4th, 1981. That winter was brutal. Ice storms knocked down power lines across Tennessee. The Cumberland Gap region got hit hard, and the cave systems were flooding worse than I'd seen in a decade. Most people stayed inside by their fires, but caves don't stop needing attention just because the weather's bad. I was doing a routine bat count in the Mammoth Cave branch system. Brown bats were dying off that winter, some kind of fungus we didn't understand yet. My job was to track how many were left and where they were roosting. I'd been down in the twilight chamber for about 3 hours when I noticed something odd. The cave wall on the east side looked different. What I'd always thought was solid limestone had a crack running through it, a big one. Caves change, water carves new passages, old ones collapse. But I'd been mapping this chamber for 5 years. I knew every formation, every flowstone ridge. This crack wasn't there before. I squeezed through with my pack and carbide lamp. The passage opened into a chamber I'd never seen. It was huge. My light beam couldn't find the far wall. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above me. That should have excited me. New chambers meant new discoveries, maybe new species. Instead, I felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. The air smelled off. Not the clean mineral smell of most caves, but something sharp and bitter. Like acid. The silence felt too heavy. Like the darkness was pressing down on me from all sides. I set up my equipment and started documenting. Temperature, 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, 98%. Airflow, minimal. All normal for a deep chamber. But my hands were shaking as I wrote in my notebook. The floor crunched under my boots. I pointed my light down and saw why. Bones. Hundreds of them, scattered across the chamber floor like fallen leaves. At first, I thought they might be from bats or cave fish. But when I knelt down to look closer, I saw a human skull grinning up at me from the pile. Then another, and another. I counted at least 20 human skulls in my light beam. Some looked old. The bone was yellow and cracked. Others looked fresh enough that I could still see teeth marks where something had been gnawing on them. I should have left right then, should have called for backup and come back with a full team. But I'm a scientist, and scientists ask questions. I picked up one of the fresher bones, a femur with deep scratches along its length. The marks looked like claw marks, but they were too big to be from any animal I knew. And they went all the way around the bone, like something had been holding it while it fed. That's when I heard the sound. A wet, sliding noise, like something enormous moving through water. It echoed from deeper in the chamber, where my light couldn't reach. I clicked off my carbide lamp and stood perfectly still in the dark, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. Something was definitely moving out there in the blackness, something big enough to make the whole chamber whisper with its passage. I turned my light back on and swept the beam across the chamber. Nothing, just bones and shadows and stone formations that looked too much like frozen screams. But on the far wall, about 20 feet up, I saw something that made my blood go cold. A hole. Not a natural cave opening, but something that looked like it had been melted into the rock. The edges were smooth and glossy, like glass. And around it, the limestone was stained black with something that looked like acid burns. Below that hole, scratched deep into the stone, were claw marks. 4 parallel gouges, each one as wide as my fist, carved into solid rock like it was soft wood. I backed toward the entrance, never taking my light off that hole. Whatever lived in this chamber was big and strong, and it dissolved rock with its touch. The sliding sound came again, and this time I saw movement in the darkness above. Something pale and massive, flowing like water across the ceiling. I ran. I made it back to the main chamber and sat there for an hour, trying to convince myself I'd imagined things. Cave diving does something to your mind sometimes. The darkness and silence can make you see things that aren't there. But the bones were real. I had photos of them on my camera. And those claw marks cut too deep into solid limestone to be my imagination. I should have hiked out and called the sheriff. But it was getting dark outside, and the ice storm was getting worse. The smart thing was to set up camp in the twilight chamber and wait for morning. I strung my hammock between two flowstone columns and tried to sleep. Every sound made me jump. Water dripping became footsteps. Wind through the passages became breathing. The cave felt alive around me, like something huge was shifting just outside my light. Around midnight, I heard voices. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The voices stopped, then started again, but closer. They sounded like people calling for help, echoing from deep in the cave system. I grabbed my light and my rope and followed the sounds. The voices led me down passages I'd never explored, deeper into the mountain than I'd ever gone. The tunnels got narrower and the ceiling lower. Soon, I was crawling on my hands and knees through limestone tubes barely wide enough for my shoulders. The voices were clearer now. A man calling, "Help me," a woman sobbing, a child crying for his mother. I crawled faster, following the sounds through twist after twist of tunnel. My light bounced off wet stone walls covered in something that looked like slime. The acid smell got stronger. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the first one, but just as wrong. More bones covered the floor, and the walls were covered in what looked like shed skin. Huge pieces of it, translucent and covered in scales, the size of dinner plates. In the center of the chamber was a pool of black water. The voices were coming from under the surface. I crawled to the edge and pointed my light down into the water. It was deep. My beam disappeared into black nothing. But floating just under the surface were shapes that made my heart stop. People. At least 6 of them, floating in the water like they were sleeping. Their clothes were torn and their skin was pale, but they were moving slightly, like they were breathing. The man closest to me opened his eyes and looked right at me. "Help," he whispered. His voice bubbled up through the water. "Please help us." I reached for my rope, ready to pull him out, when something huge moved in the water beneath them. A coil the size of a tree trunk surfaced for just a moment, covered in scales that reflected my light like mirrors. Then it sank back down, and the people in the water sank with it. "No!" I grabbed for the man's hand, but he was already too deep. The water bubbled and churned, and then went still. I sat by that pool for I don't know how long, shining my light into the depths. The people were gone, but I could still hear them calling for help from somewhere far below. That's when I realized what I was looking at. Those people weren't dead. They were being kept alive. Stored. Like food in a refrigerator. I backed away from the pool and bumped into something that shouldn't have been there. Another piece of shed skin, but this one was fresh, still wet and warm to the touch. It was enormous. I couldn't see where it ended in the darkness. Whatever had shed this skin was at least 20 feet long and as thick as my waist. The voices under the water started getting louder, more urgent, like something was disturbing them. I turned to crawl back through the tunnel, but my light caught movement at the passage entrance. Something was blocking my way out. At first I thought it was a rock formation I hadn't noticed before. But rocks don't have eyes. And they don't move like liquid mercury across the cave floor. The thing filled the entire tunnel entrance. In my light, I could see scales and muscle and something that might have been an arm, but wrong, too long, with too many joints. It moved without making a sound, flowing like water but solid as stone. 2 eyes opened in what might have been its head. They were bigger than my fists and reflected my light like a cat's, but intelligent. Too intelligent. It was studying me the way I might study a specimen in a lab. I couldn't see its whole body. It disappeared back into the tunnel in coils and curves that my mind couldn't quite follow. But I could tell it was huge. The shed skin in the chamber wasn't even from a full-grown one. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then it smiled. I swear it smiled, even though it didn't have lips or teeth like anything I'd ever seen. And then it spoke. "Welcome," it said in a voice like grinding stone. "You will join the others soon." I grabbed a fist-sized rock and threw it as hard as I could. It hit the creature right between the eyes and bounced off without leaving a mark. The thing made a sound that might have been laughter and flowed backward into the tunnel, leaving my escape route open. I crawled faster than I've ever crawled in my life, expecting to feel those impossible arms grab me from behind at any second. But it let me go. It was playing with me. By the time I made it back to the main chamber, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold my light steady. I packed my gear and headed for the surface, even though it was still dark and sleeting outside. I'd rather face a winter storm than whatever was hunting me in those caves. I made it to my truck and drove straight to the ranger station. My supervisor, Tom Bradley, took one look at me and put on a pot of coffee. "You look like hell, Maggie," he said. "What happened down there?" I told him everything, the bones, the voices, the thing in the tunnel. I showed him the photos of the bone chamber on my camera. I even drew pictures of the claw marks and the acid burns on the walls. Tom listened without interrupting, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. By the time I finished, he was looking at me like I needed a vacation and maybe some counseling. "Look," he said gently, "you've been working too hard. 13 years in the caves, and this winter's been rough on everyone. Sometimes the mind plays tricks." "I'm not crazy, Tom." I spread the photos across his desk. "Look at these bones. Look at those claw marks. You think I carved those myself?" He studied the pictures for a long time. Could be animal remains. Bears sometimes drag kills into caves. And limestone's soft, flowing water can make marks that look like claws. I wanted to argue, but I could hear how crazy my story sounded. A giant snake thing that talks and keeps people alive underwater? If someone had told me that a week ago, I'd have recommended they see a doctor. "Maybe you're right," I lied. "Maybe I just need some sleep." But I wasn't going to let it drop. I spent the next 3 days in the county library, researching everything I could find about the cave system. Historical records, geological surveys, Cherokee tribal stories, anything that might explain what I'd seen. What I found made my blood run cold. Starting in 1923, people had been disappearing around the caves. Not many, 1 or 2 every few years. Always during the wet season, always experienced cavers who knew better than to take stupid risks. The Cherokee stories were older and more detailed. They talked about the Ukthen, serpent spirits that lived in the deepest caves and fed on human flesh. According to the legends, they were intelligent, patient hunters who could live for centuries. They kept their prey alive as long as possible to keep the meat fresh. The stories said the Ukthen only came out during the flooding season, when the underground rivers ran high and opened passages that were normally sealed. Just like this February. I also found something else. Cave rescue reports going back 60 years, all describing the same thing. Rescue teams would find evidence of missing cavers, gear, ropes, sometimes clothes, but never bodies. Search teams would report hearing voices calling for help from passages too narrow or dangerous to explore. The voices always came from the deepest parts of the cave system, the parts that flooded every spring. On the 4th day, I got a call that made my hands shake. 3 college kids from UT had gone into the caves yesterday and hadn't come out. Their car was still in the parking lot, their dorm rooms empty. "We need you to guide the search team," Tom said. "You know those caves better than anyone." I wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell him to seal the caves and wait for spring. But those kids were down there somewhere, and if I was right about what I'd seen, time was running out for them. The search team was 6 people, me, Tom, 2 sheriff's deputies, and 2 volunteer cave rescuers from Knoxville. We went in through the main entrance with full gear, ropes, lights, emergency supplies, and radios that wouldn't work once we got deep enough. We found the first sign of the college kids about 2 hours in. A backpack caught on a flowstone formation, torn open like something had ripped it apart looking for food inside. An hour later, we found footprints in the mud that stopped at the edge of an underground stream. The prints showed all 3 kids walking normally, then nothing, like they'd just vanished into the water. That's when Jake Morrison, one of the volunteer rescuers, heard the voices. "Listen," he whispered, holding up his hand. We all stopped talking. From somewhere deep in the cave system, we could hear people calling for help. Young voices. Scared voices. "That's them," said Deputy Collins. "They're alive. We need to follow those voices," Tom said. I grabbed his arm. "No. We need to get out of here right now." "Maggie, what's wrong with you? Those kids need help." I looked at the torn backpack. The footprints that ended at the water. The tunnels that led deeper into darkness. Everything in my training told me to help those kids. Everything in my gut told me it was a trap. "Those voices," I said slowly. "They're coming from the bone chamber, the place I told you about." So that chamber is half a mile down, through passages that would take an experienced caver hours to navigate. Those kids have been missing for 18 hours. How did they get that deep that fast? Tom stared at me. Are you saying those aren't the kids we're looking for? Before I could answer, the voices got louder, closer, and I realized they weren't coming from the direction of the bone chamber anymore. They were coming from all around us. Help us, the voice of a young woman echoed from a passage to our left. We're trapped. A man's voice called from behind us. Please, someone help. A child's voice came from straight ahead. 6 different voices, calling from 6 different directions. But there were only 3 missing kids. Jake Morrison was already heading toward the woman's voice, his light beam bouncing off the tunnel walls. I'm coming, he shouted back. Jake, wait! I called after him, but he was already disappearing into the narrow passage. We heard his voice echoing back for about 30 seconds. Then nothing. The voices kept calling, but now there was a 7th one added to the mix. Jake's voice, calling for help from somewhere in the darkness. The remaining 5 of us stood in that tunnel for maybe 10 minutes, listening to 7 voices, calling for help from 7 different directions. Tom was the first to break the silence. This isn't possible, he said. His voice was shaking. We need to leave, I said, right now. But Deputy Collins was already following one of the voices, his flashlight beam disappearing into a side passage. I've got a visual on one of them, he called back. Young male, trapped under some rocks. That was the last we heard from Collins. Now there were 8 voices. What the hell is happening here? Deputy Martinez whispered. She had her gun drawn, though I couldn't imagine what good a pistol would do against something that could mimic human voices perfectly. It's hunting us, I said. The thing I saw, it's separating us, picking us off one at a time. Those voices aren't coming from people, they're coming from it. Tom looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You're saying some animal is imitating human voices? Not some animal, something intelligent, something that's been doing this for decades. The voices started again, but this time they were different. Instead of calling for help, they were having conversations. Jake's voice. Hey Tom, I found a way out over here. Collins' voice. Martinez, I need backup in the south tunnel. One of the college kids. Professor O'Sullivan, is that you? We're safe now, come toward my voice. It knew our names. It had been listening to us talk. Nobody move, I whispered. Nobody follow any voice you hear. Whatever's down here, it wants us to split up. That's when the lights started going out. Martinez's flashlight flickered and died. Then the volunteer rescuer's headlamp went dark. One by one, our lights were failing, leaving us in deeper and deeper darkness. The batteries are new, Tom said, shaking his flashlight. They should last for hours. Something was draining them, something that didn't want us to see what was coming. My carbide lamp was the only light left, casting jumping shadows on the tunnel walls. In those shadows, I started to see movement, huge, flowing shapes that moved too smoothly to be human. Back to back, I said. Everyone back to back, now. We formed a circle, facing outward. Tom had his Ranger radio, Martinez had her gun, and the volunteer rescuer had an ice axe. Not much against something that could drain batteries and imitate voices perfectly. The voices stopped. The silence was worse than the calling. At least with the voices, we knew where it was. Now it could be anywhere. My carbide flame started burning lower. Whatever was affecting our electric lights was affecting the gas mixture too. Maggie, Tom whispered. What exactly did you see in that chamber? Something that's been living in these caves for longer than any of us can imagine. Something that's patient and smart and very, very hungry. That's when we heard the sliding sound. The same wet, massive movement I'd heard in the bone chamber. But closer now. Much closer. In the dying light of my carbide lamp, I saw it. The thing flowed around the tunnel walls like water, but I could see it was solid, muscular. Its body was at least 20 feet long and covered in scales that reflected our last bit of light. It moved without making any sound except that horrible, wet sliding. And it had arms, 2 of them, growing from what might have been its shoulders. They were too long and had too many joints, but they ended in hands with fingers, human-like fingers with claws instead of nails. But the worst part was its face. It looked almost human from a distance. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. But up close, everything was wrong. The eyes were too big and reflected light like mirrors. The nose was just 2 slits that opened and closed like gills. And the mouth was full of teeth that curved backward like a shark's. When it smiled at us, I could see all the way down its throat. "Hello, Margaret," it said in my voice. Perfect pronunciation, perfect tone. "Thank you for bringing me more food." Martinez emptied her clip into it. 6 shots at point-blank range. The bullets hit and bounced off its scales like they were made of steel. It laughed with Tom's voice, then Jake's, then Colin's, a chorus of everyone it had taken. The volunteer rescuer swung his ice axe at its head. One of those impossible arms moved faster than I could follow and grabbed the axe in mid-swing. The man screamed once before another arm wrapped around his waist and lifted him off the ground. "Help me," he called in his own voice. Then the creature's throat moved, swallowing, and it called, "Help me." Again in the same voice, even though the man was gone. Tom was backing away, but there was nowhere to go. The thing filled the tunnel from floor to ceiling. "It keeps them alive," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The people it takes. It keeps them alive and aware while it feeds on them. That's why we can still hear their voices." The creature's massive head turned toward me. "Very good, Dr. O'Sullivan. You understand. Most prey never understands." My carbide lamp flickered and died. In the total darkness, I heard Tom scream. Then Martinez. Then silence. "Now it's just you and me, Margaret," the thing said in Tom's voice. "Just like I planned." I was alone in absolute darkness with something that had been hunting humans for longer than our recorded history. My lights were dead, my radio was useless, and I was at least half a mile underground in a flooded cave system that only I knew how to navigate. But I'm a cave biologist. I know things about underground ecosystems that most people never think about. I felt around on the tunnel floor until I found what I was looking for: bat guano. Lots of it, built up over decades in this part of the cave system. I scooped handfuls into my specimen bags. "What are you doing, Margaret?" the creature asked in my own voice. "Are you gathering samples? Very scientific of you." I could hear it moving closer, that wet sliding sound getting louder in the darkness. "I'm making a bomb," I said. It laughed with Martinez's voice. "A bomb? From what?" "Methane," I said, still gathering guano. Bat droppings produce methane gas when they decay. In enclosed spaces like caves, the concentration can get high enough to be explosive. I found my emergency flare in my pack, the kind cave rescuers use to signal for help. One spark in a methane-rich environment would create an explosion big enough to collapse this tunnel. "You'll kill yourself too," the creature pointed out reasonably. "Maybe. But I know this cave system better than you do. I know where the air currents flow, and I know where the methane concentrates. You've been living here so long, you probably don't even smell it anymore." I was lying. I had no idea if there was enough methane in this tunnel to make a decent explosion. But the creature didn't know that. "Interesting," it said, and I could hear uncertainty in its voice for the first time. "You would die to prevent me from feeding?" "I won't die," I said, pulling the pin on the flare. "But you might." I threw the flare as hard as I could toward where I thought the creature was and hit the ground. The explosion wasn't huge, but in the enclosed tunnel, it was enough. Rock dust filled the air, and chunks of limestone rained down from the ceiling. I heard the creature roar. Not in any human voice, but in its own voice, a sound like grinding stone and rushing water. When the dust settled, I could see dim light filtering in from somewhere above. The explosion had opened a crack in the ceiling that led to a passage I didn't recognize. The creature was hurt but not dead. I could hear it moving in the rubble, making angry hissing sounds. But it wasn't following me as I climbed up through the crack. I found myself in a natural chimney that led upward through the limestone. It was a tight squeeze, and I had to leave my pack behind, but I could feel air moving through it. Air that meant a way out. It took me 6 hours to climb up through that chimney, squeezing through spaces barely wide enough for my shoulders. When I finally saw daylight, I was coming out of a sinkhole half a mile from the main cave entrance. I stumbled through the woods to my truck and drove straight to the sheriff's office. I told them there had been a cave-in, that I was the only survivor. I said the others were trapped too deep to recover safely. They believed me, mostly. Cave rescue operations are dangerous, and people die in cave-ins all the time. The fact that I was in shock and covered in rock dust made my story more believable. They sealed the cave system 3 days later. "Structurally unsound," the report said. "Risk of further collapse too high to allow public access." I never went back. I transferred to a desk job 6 months later. Administrative work, no more field work. I told everyone I'd developed claustrophobia after the cave-in. That was true enough. But sometimes, on February nights, when the rain is heavy and the underground rivers are running high, I dream about voices calling for help from deep underground. Tom's voice, Martinez's voice, Jake's voice, all of them, still calling, still aware, still hoping someone will come for them. And sometimes I dream about the creature's voice, using my own words to call other people down into the darkness. Help me, it calls in my voice. I'm trapped, please help me. I live in Arizona now, desert country, where the caves are shallow and dry and nothing lives in them but bats and pack rats. I sleep better here. But every winter, when the news reports come in from Tennessee about missing hikers and cave-ins and search teams hearing voices underground, I know it's still down there, still hunting, still patient. And every February, I send anonymous letters to the Forest Service, warning them to keep the caves sealed. I never sign my name, but I always end the same way. The things in the deep places are older than we are, and hungrier than we can imagine. Some doors should never be opened. Most of the time, they listen. Most of the time, the caves stay sealed. But not always. And on those nights when I can't sleep, I wonder how many voices it's collected by now. How many people are floating in those black pools, kept alive and aware, while something ancient and patient feeds on them slowly. I wonder if they dream about daylight and warm air and the feeling of grass under their feet. I wonder if they dream about being rescued. I hope they do. Because I know now that no one's coming for them. Some places are too deep and too dark, and some hungers are too old to ever be satisfied. The caves of Cumberland Gap are sealed now, marked with warnings about unstable rock and dangerous gases. But every February, when the underground rivers run high, I know the passages open again, and something old and patient stirs in the deepest darkness, listening for the sound of footsteps and human voices. Still hunting, still hungry, still calling for help in voices that will never be silent again. My name is William Hensley, and I've been a park ranger for 22 years, born and raised in these mountains. Just like my daddy and his daddy before him, the Hensleys have called the Great Smokies home for over 200 years, and I figured I knew every trail, every creek, every hidden valley in this wilderness. I was wrong. September 21st, 1977, started like any other Tuesday. I was checking my gear at the ranger station when dispatch crackled over the radio. Missing persons report, family of 4, experienced hikers from Atlanta, the Morgans. They'd been due back from a 3-day backpacking trip yesterday morning, but never showed up at their car. Last known location was the Cataract Falls area, dispatch said. Family's been hiking these mountains for 10 years. They know what they're doing. That's what worried me. When experienced folks go missing in my mountains, it usually means something bad happened fast. Bear attack, maybe, or someone took a fall. I grabbed my pack and headed out. The trail to Cataract Falls is a hard 2-day hike from the nearest road. It's old Cherokee country up there, the kind of place where cell phones don't work and your radio crackles with static half the time. My grandfather used to tell stories about that area, said the Cherokee, called it part of the Nightland, where spirits lived. But Granddad told a lot of stories, and I'd always figured they were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. The first day's hike felt normal enough. I followed their planned route, checking for signs. Found their first camp right where it should be. Fire rings still there, but cold for at least 2 days. They'd been neat about it, packed out all their trash like good hikers should. Nothing seemed wrong. But as I climbed higher into the mountains, something started feeling off. Can't put my finger on what exactly. The forest was too quiet. Maybe. Usually you hear birds chattering, squirrels rustling in the leaves, insects buzzing. But the higher I went, the more silent it got, like the mountain was holding its breath. I made my own camp that night about 5 miles from where the Morgans had their second planned stop, ate my dinner, cold beans and jerky, and tried the radio. Nothing but static. Not unusual up here, but it added to the uneasy feeling growing in my gut. That night, I woke up around 3 in the morning. Something had pulled me out of sleep, but I couldn't figure out what. I lay there in my sleeping bag, listening. The silence was so complete it felt like being underwater. Even the wind had stopped. Then I heard it. Voices, distant and faint, coming from somewhere up the mountain. Sounded like people calling out, maybe in distress. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, straining to hear better. The voices were gone. I stood there in my long johns and boots for 10 minutes, listening hard. Nothing. Just that weird, perfect silence. Could have been my imagination, or maybe sound carrying funny in the thin mountain air. But something about those voices bothered me. They'd sounded wrong somehow. Like they were coming from too far away, or maybe from underground. I didn't sleep much after that. Morning came with a thick fog rolling in from nowhere. When I'd gone to bed, the sky was clear and full of stars. Now I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees overnight, and my breath was coming out in white puffs. September fog isn't unusual, but this felt different. It seemed to move with purpose, swirling around the trees like it was looking for something. And it was cold. Not just chilly, but the kind of bone-deep cold that comes with winter storms. I packed up quick and headed toward the Morgans' second campsite. The fog made navigation tricky, but I knew these trails by heart. At least, I thought I did. 20 minutes into my hike, I realized I was lost. Now, I've been walking these mountains my whole life. I know them better than my own backyard, but somehow, the trail I'd taken hundreds of times was leading me somewhere new. The landmarks were all wrong. There was supposed to be a big granite outcrop shaped like a sleeping bear about here, but all I could see through the fog were trees I didn't recognize. I stopped and checked my compass. The needle was spinning slowly in circles, like it couldn't decide which way was north. I tapped the glass, thinking maybe it was broken, but the spinning just got faster. That's when I found the first piece of gear. A bright red backpack was hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground. Not thrown there by accident, it was placed there, careful-like, with the straps wrapped neat around the branch. The fog was too thick to see clearly, but I could make out Morgan written on the name tag. Getting it down wasn't easy. I had to shimmy up the trunk like a kid again, bark scraping against my uniform. When I finally worked the pack free, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The branch where it had been hanging was completely dead, black and brittle, like it had been burned, but the branches above and below it were green and healthy. Inside the pack, everything was organized exactly how you'd expect from experienced hikers. Water bottles still full, first aid kit untouched, trail maps folded neat. But the food was gone. Not eaten, gone. Empty wrappers and containers, but no crumbs, no mess, nothing. Like something had sucked every bit of food right out of the packages. I stuffed the pack in my bag and kept walking, trying to make sense of what I'd found. People don't just hang their gear in trees for no reason. And they sure don't hang them 8 feet up. Maybe they'd been trying to keep it away from bears, but bears can climb, and anyway, there hadn't been any claw marks on the tree. The fog started lifting around noon, but instead of making things better, it just made them worse. As the white mist cleared, I could see exactly where I was, and it was nowhere I'd ever been before. I was standing in a small valley that shouldn't exist. According to my maps, this whole area was supposed to be ridgeline. But here I was, surrounded by tall peaks I didn't recognize, with a creek running through the middle that wasn't marked on any chart. The water in the creek was crystal clear, but it wasn't flowing right. Instead of following the natural slope of the land, it seemed to be running uphill in some places, defying gravity. I knelt down and put my hand in the water. It was ice cold, so cold it burned my fingers like fire. That's when I heard the voices again. This time they were closer, and I could make out words. A man's voice calling, "Help us, we're down here." It was coming from somewhere across the creek, maybe up in the trees, on the far slope. "Hello," I shouted back. "Where are you? Keep talking." But the voice stopped. Just cut off, like someone had flipped a switch. I waited, listening hard, but got nothing back. Then, just as I was about to call out again, I heard a woman's voice from a completely different direction, behind me and off to the left. "Thank God," she said. "We've been waiting so long." I spun around, but there was nobody there. Just trees and rocks, and the impossible creek running uphill. "Where are you?" I yelled. "I can't see you." A child's voice answered from somewhere above me. "We're right here, mister. Can't you see us?" I looked up into the canopy, heart hammering. Nothing but leaves and branches and empty sky. That's when I started to understand I wasn't dealing with a normal search and rescue situation. I spent the rest of that day finding more of their gear, scattered across the valley in the strangest places. Mrs. Morgan's hiking boots were sitting neat as you please on top of a boulder, laces tied tight, like she'd just stepped out of them and walked away barefoot. Mr. Morgan's jacket was spread across a patch of ground where nothing grew, not even grass. The dirt underneath it was black and cold, like it had been burned with ice instead of fire. Each piece of gear I found was surrounded by that same wrongness: dead plants, cold spots, areas where my compass spun like a broken toy. And always, just at the edge of hearing, those voices calling out from places where no people could be. By evening, I'd found enough gear to account for the whole family: packs, clothes, sleeping bags, even their tent, but no sign of the people themselves. It was like they'd just vanished right out of their belongings. I made camp that night next to the impossible creek, even though everything in my gut told me to get as far away from this valley as possible. But I couldn't leave. Not while there was still a chance the Morgans were alive somewhere. I tried the radio again after dark. Still nothing but static, but now there was something else mixed in with the white noise. Voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded old, like the Cherokee words my grandfather sometimes used, but different, older. The temperature dropped again as soon as the sun went down. I could see my breath in the firelight, and frost was forming on the outside of my tent. In September. In North Carolina, around midnight, the voices came back. But this time, they were right outside my tent. "Ranger Hensley," a man's voice said, clear as day. It sounded like Mr. Morgan from the description I'd been given, but something about it was off. Too flat, like someone reading words they didn't understand. "We need your help," the voice continued. "We're trapped. The mountain won't let us leave." I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nobody there. Just empty forest and that strange, unnatural cold. "Where are you?" I called out. "Down here," came a woman's voice from directly beneath my feet. We fell through. The ground opened up and swallowed us. I pointed my flashlight at the ground around my tent. Solid rock. No holes, no cracks, no way anyone could be underneath. "We're so cold," a child's voice whispered from somewhere above me. "So hungry, why won't you help us?" I kept my light moving, searching the darkness, but I was alone. Completely alone in a valley that shouldn't exist, listening to voices of people who might not even be alive anymore. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were everywhere, around my campsite, in the dirt, in the patches of frost, even on the solid rock. Bare feet, all different sizes. A whole family's worth of prints, but they didn't make sense. Some of them started in the middle of open space and ended at nothing. Others seemed to walk straight up trees and keep going into empty air. And they were all ice cold. When I put my hand over one of the prints, the cold hit my palm like a physical thing. I didn't sleep at all that second night. Come morning, the footprints were gone. Not covered over or weathered away, just gone, like they'd never been there at all. But something else had taken their place. A trail of white stones led away from my campsite, heading deeper into the valley. They weren't natural to the area, too perfectly round, too white, and they glowed faintly in the early morning light like they had their own inner fire. I knew I should turn around. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to pack up and get out of this valley. But those voices last night, they'd sounded so real, so desperate. If there was even a chance the Morgan family was still alive somewhere, I had to follow. The stone trail led me up through a part of the forest I'd never seen before, even though I'd been walking these mountains for decades. The trees were wrong, too big, too old, with bark patterns I didn't recognize. Some of them had faces carved into the trunk, but they weren't fresh carvings. The cuts were old, grown over with moss, like they'd been there for hundreds of years. And the faces were watching me. I know how that sounds, but I swear it's true. As I walked past, the carved eyes would follow my movement. Not all at once, just little shifts, so subtle I almost missed them. But when I stopped and looked back, the faces were definitely turned toward me. The white stones led me to a place that stopped me cold. It was a circle of standing stones, each one about 12 feet tall, arranged in a perfect ring around a flat area of ground. The grass inside the circle was dead black, and the air above it shimmered like heat waves. even though the morning was cold enough to frost. I'd found Cherokee sacred sites before in my years as a ranger, but this was different. Older. The stones weren't carved, they were shaped by something that wasn't human hands. And they hummed. Not loud, but you could feel it in your bones when you got close. That's where I found the Morgan family. They were sitting in the center of the stone circle, backs against each other, holding hands like they were protecting themselves from something. But they weren't moving, weren't breathing. Their eyes were open, staring at nothing, and their skin had a gray, waxy look I'd seen before on bodies that had been dead for days. But when I called out to them, they turned their heads and looked right at me. "Ranger Hensley," Mr. Morgan said, his voice carrying across the circle clear as anything. His mouth didn't move when he spoke. "Thank you for coming. We've been waiting." I stood frozen at the edge of the stone circle, every part of me screaming that this was wrong. Dead people don't talk. Dead people don't move. But here they were, looking at me with gray, cloudy eyes, waiting for something. Are you hurt?" I managed to ask. Mrs. Morgan tilted her head, bird-like. "We drank from the spring," she said without moving her lips. "We didn't know it was sacred water. Now we can't leave." "The mountain wants payment," their teenage son added. "Blood for blood. Life for life." Their little daughter, who couldn't have been more than 8, smiled at me with too many teeth. "Will you trade with us, mister? Will you stay so we can go?" I took a step back from the circle. The humming from the stones got louder, and the air above the dead grass started moving faster, spinning like a whirlpool. "I don't understand," I said. "The Yunwitsunsdi are angry, mister," Morgan explained. "The little people. We took what wasn't ours. Drank sacred water, picked up stones from their burial ground. The mountain spirits demand balance." That's when I saw them. Small figures, maybe 3 feet tall, stepping out from behind the standing stones. They looked like people, but wrong, too thin, too pale, with long white hair and clothes made from what looked like spider silk. Their eyes were huge and completely black, and when they moved, they seemed to float just above the ground. The Cherokee little people. The Yunwitsunsdi. My grandfather's stories came flooding back. The little people were guardians of sacred places, protectors of the old ways. They helped those who showed proper respect, but they punished anyone who violated their lands. And their punishment was always the same. Take what was taken, trade life for life. "You see them now," Mrs. Morgan said. "That means you're part of it. The mountain has chosen you." The little people formed a circle around me, but stayed outside the standing stones. One of them, who seemed to be their leader, stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. "Ranger of the white man's law," he said, "your people have forgotten the old agreements. This family took sacred water from our spring, disturbed our burial stones, walked on holy ground without permission. They belong to us now." "But they're dead," I said. "Death is just another country," the spirit replied. "They are citizens of our realm now. But we are not without mercy. We offer trade, 1 life freely given for 4 lives returned." I looked at the Morgan family, sitting there in their circle, gray and still but somehow still aware. Their eyes pleaded with me, but their mouths didn't move. "What happens if I say no?" I asked. "Then they stay, and you join them. The mountain always collects what it's owed." The circle of little people moved closer. The air inside the stone ring was spinning faster now, and I could see shapes moving in it, faces, reaching hands, the shadows of people who'd been taken by the mountain over the years. I had a choice to make, and I was running out of time. "Wait," I said, holding up my hands as the little people pressed closer. "There has to be another way, some other kind of payment you'd accept." The leader tilted his head, considering. "You know the old ways, Ranger? Your grandfather's grandfather knew us. His blood runs in you. That gives you the right to speak." I thought fast, remembering every story my grandfather had ever told me about dealing with mountain spirits. "My family has protected these mountains for generations. We've always shown respect for the sacred places. That has to count for something." "It counts for your life," the spirit said. "We do not take you immediately, but it does not save these trespassers." "What if they make proper amends?" I asked. "What if they return what they took and perform the right ceremonies?" The little people whispered among themselves in their ancient language, like wind through pine needles. Finally, their leader spoke again. "They took sacred water into their bodies. That cannot be returned. They scattered the burial stones of our ancestors. Those cannot be made whole. But, he paused, studying me with those huge black eyes. If one who knows the old ways performs the payment ceremony, and if the sacred objects are returned to their proper places, we might accept a different bargain. Hope flickered in my chest. What kind of bargain? The family may go, but they will carry a mark. They will remember this place and speak of it to no one. And you, Ranger, will become guardian of this sacred site. You will keep others away, protect it from further violation. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than anyone dying. What about the sacred objects? What did they take? The spirit gestured toward a pile of stones near one of the standing monoliths. 5 burial stones. They are still here, but moved from their proper places. And he looked at the Morgan family with something like disgust. They used our ceremonial fire bowl to cook their food. Mrs. Morgan made a small sound, like she was trying to speak. The leader glanced at her, then nodded. She may speak briefly. We didn't know, Mrs. Morgan whispered, her voice like dry leaves. We found a stone bowl near the spring, thought it was just a natural formation. We used it to boil water. Tears ran down her gray cheeks. We're sorry, we're so sorry. The fire bowl was sitting near the center of the circle. A beautiful piece of carved stone, blackened with age and use. Just looking at it, I could tell it was ancient, probably thousands of years old. I'll put everything back, I promised, exactly where it belongs. But you have to tell me how. I don't know the proper ceremonies. Your blood knows, the leader said. Listen to your grandfather's voice in your heart. As soon as he said it, I could hear it. My grandfather's voice, speaking Cherokee words I barely understood, telling me what to do. Knowledge that had been passed down through generations of mountain people, sleeping in my blood until this moment. I walked carefully to the scattered burial stones. They were smooth river rocks, each one carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. As I picked up the first one, it was warm to the touch, almost alive. The spirits watched silently as I placed each stone in its proper position. The knowledge came to me as I worked. This stone went at the eastern point to honor the rising sun. That one faced the sacred mountain where the first spirits dwelt. Each placement felt right in a way I couldn't explain. The fire bowl was harder. It was heavy, carved from a single piece of stone that must have weighed 50 pounds. But when I lifted it, it felt light as a feather in my hands. The proper place for it was at the western edge of the circle, positioned to catch the light of the setting sun. As I set the bowl in its place, something changed. The air stopped spinning above the dead grass. The humming from the standing stones shifted to a different tone. Not threatening now, but welcoming. The little people stepped back, giving me room to work. Now the water ceremony, the leader said. I walked to the sacred spring they'd mentioned, a small pool of crystal-clear water bubbling up from somewhere deep underground. The water was ice-cold, but when I cupped it in my hands and drank, it tasted like starlight and ancient forests. Following the voice in my heart, I carried water from the spring to each burial stone, speaking words in Cherokee that my grandfather had never taught me but that I somehow knew. With each blessing, the stones glowed briefly, acknowledging the proper ritual. Finally, I filled the ceremonial bowl with sacred water and carried it to the center of the stone circle. Yunwitsunsdi, I said, using the words that came from somewhere deeper than memory. Keepers of the sacred places, guardians of the old ways. I offer myself as protector of this holy ground. Let this family go in peace, and I will ensure no others disturb your rest. The leader of the little people approached me. Up close, I could see that his face was ancient beyond measure, marked with the wisdom and weariness of centuries. Drink from the bowl, Ranger. Accept the covenant. I lifted the ceremonial bowl and drank the sacred water. It burned going down, but not in a painful way, more like fire that purified instead of destroying. As soon as I swallowed, I felt something fundamental change inside me. I was connected to this place now, bound to it by blood and spirit. The Morgan family gasped as one, color flooding back into their gray faces. They blinked, looked around in confusion, then scrambled to their feet. What happened? Mr. Morgan asked. Where are we? But they were already fading, becoming transparent like morning mist. The little people were sending them back to the world of the living, erasing their memories of this place to protect its secrets. Remember only this, the spirit leader said to the fading family. The mountains are sacred. Respect what you do not understand." Then they were gone, returned to their car in the parking lot below, probably with some story about getting lost and finding their way out again. I was alone with the Yunwitsunsdi. "It is done," the leader said. "You are guardian now. This place is under your protection." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "You will know when others approach this sacred ground. You will turn them away, guide them to safer paths, and in return, we will help you protect all the sacred places in these mountains." He gestured, and suddenly I could see them, dozens of sacred sites scattered throughout the Great Smokies, glowing like stars in my mind, springs and burial grounds, ceremonial circles and spirit paths. All of them under my protection now. "Will I see you again?" I asked. "When needed," the spirit said. "We are always here, watching, keeping the old agreements." Now you are part of that covenant. The little people faded back into the forest, leaving me alone in the stone circle. But I wasn't really alone. I could feel their presence, and the presence of all the spirits who called these mountains home. The hike back to civilization took me 3 days, but that was fine. I needed the time to think, to understand what had happened to me. The official report I filed was simple: found the Morgan family suffering from hypothermia and disorientation, guided them back to safety. They corroborated the story, though they seemed confused about the details. Said they remembered getting lost, drinking from a spring, then waking up in their car. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've turned away dozens of hikers from the sacred sites, always with reasonable excuses. Trails washed out, bear activity, unstable rock formations. People accept these explanations from a ranger who's worked the mountains for 22 years. But sometimes, late at night in my cabin, I wonder if I made the right choice. The connection to the sacred places is stronger now. I can feel every footstep on sacred ground, every disturbance to the old sites. And sometimes, when the moon is dark, I can see the little people moving through the forest, going about their ancient business of protecting what needs protecting. My grandfather would have understood. He always said the mountains chose their own protectors, and that some debts could only be paid with service, not coin. The Morgan family moved to California not long after their hiking accident. Mrs. Morgan sent me a thank you card, saying how grateful they were for my help finding them when they got lost. But there was something in her handwriting, a little shakiness, like she remembered more than she was supposed to. I keep that card on my desk as a reminder. The mountains are alive, and they have long memories. They also have their own justice, their own way of keeping balance. My job isn't just to protect visitors from the wilderness anymore. It's to protect the wilderness from visitors who don't understand what they're walking into. Most days, that sits easy with me. These mountains have been sacred for thousands of years, long before white settlers came, long before the Park Service existed. The little people were here first, and they'll be here long after we're gone. I'm just honored they let me help keep the peace between their world and ours. But sometimes, on foggy September mornings, when the air gets that strange quality and the silence feels too perfect, I remember sitting in that stone circle, drinking from a ceremonial bowl while spirits older than memory watched from the shadows. And I wonder what other bargains are being made in these mountains, what other debts are coming due. Because the mountains always collect what they're owed, one way or another. The mountain takes its own, and now I'm part of that taking. That's the truth no official report could ever contain. My name is Samuel Thornton, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. Before that, I spent 12 years as a Kentucky state trooper. I've seen car wrecks that would make you sick, drug busts gone wrong, and enough violence to last 3 lifetimes. I thought I knew what scared people in these hills. I was wrong. Daniel Boone National Forest has always been my home. The Red River Gorge, with its sandstone cliffs and natural arches, drew me back after my police days. I wanted something peaceful, something clean. Just trees, trails, and tourists who needed directions to the waterfalls. The locals always had their stories. Old-timers talked about booger dogs and shadow wolves that walked like men. My grandfather told tales about things that howled with human voices deep in the gorge. I listened politely and filed it all under mountain folklore. Every region has its monsters. Kentucky's just happened to walk on 2 legs sometimes. November 1989 started normal enough. Hunting season brought the usual problems: city folks getting lost, arguments over tree stands, the occasional poaching case. I'd been working hunter safety for years, teaching kids how to handle rifles and adults how not to shoot each other. It was good work. Honest work. The first strange report came on November 10th. Jim Morrison, who ran cattle on the edge of the forest, lost 3 head overnight. Something had torn them apart and dragged pieces into the tree line. Jim blamed wild dogs, but the local sheriff called me since it happened on federal land. I drove out to look at what was left. The kill site bothered me right away. The cattle hadn't just been attacked, they'd been hunted. Efficiently. The bite marks on their necks were too precise, too clean. Wild dogs kill messy, tearing and ripping until the animal bleeds out. This looked more like how a big cat kills, but we don't have anything that size in Kentucky. The strangest part was the tracks. They started as normal dog prints, maybe German Shepherd size, but halfway to the forest they changed, got longer, more spread out. By the time they reached the trees, they looked almost like barefoot human prints, but with claw marks at the tips. I took pictures and filed my report. Recommended Jim talk to Fish and Wildlife about problem predators. But something about those changing tracks stuck with me. In 19 years of ranger work, I'd never seen anything like it. 3 days later, I got a call that changed everything. The call came in around dawn on November 13th. 4 hunters from Louisville had missed their check-in time. Their families were worried. The men had permits for a remote section of the gorge, about 15 miles from the nearest road. You had to hike in through narrow trails between the cliffs to reach their camping spot. I grabbed my gear and headed out. November mornings in the gorge are cold and misty. The sandstone walls rise up on both sides like ancient castle ruins, covered in bare trees that look like skeleton hands reaching toward gray sky. Your footsteps echo funny in there, like someone's always following just out of sight. The hiking trail wound through narrow passes and across wooden bridges spanning deep ravines. After 2 hours, I reached the hunters' camp. Their orange dome tents were still set up perfectly. Sleeping bags laid out neat. Camp stove sitting ready with coffee grounds still in the pot. It looked like they'd just stepped away for a minute. But their rifles were gone. And there was blood. Not much at first. Just a few drops leading away from camp toward the cliff face. I followed the trail, calling their names. The blood got heavier as it led into a narrow canyon between 2 rock walls. That's where I found the first body. His name was Mike Chen, according to his hunting license. He was wedged into a crack in the rock wall, about 8 feet off the ground. Something had dragged him up there. The bite marks on his throat were clean and deep, just like the cattle. But Mike was a big man, maybe 220 pounds. What kind of animal could haul that much weight straight up a rock face? I radioed for backup, but the cliffs blocked most signals. Only got static. I was on my own until I could hike back to range where my radio worked. I found the second body 50 yards deeper in the canyon. This one had been torn apart more, like whatever killed him had more time to feed. But again, the killing bite was surgical. Professional. The victim's rifle lay nearby, unfired, safety still on. The third body was hanging from a tree branch 12 feet up. The fourth was at the bottom of a small waterfall, caught against the rocks. 4 experienced hunters, 4 clean kills, no sign they'd even tried to fight back. But the really strange thing was how the bodies were positioned. They formed a rough line pointing deeper into the canyon, like someone was leaving a trail, like bait. As I stood there trying to make sense of it, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Howling. But not like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. This had rhythm to it. Structure. Like voices calling back and forth in a language I didn't understand. And it was coming from multiple directions, echoing off the canyon walls. I drew my service weapon and started backing toward the trail. The howling got closer, louder, more organized. That's when I saw the eyes. Yellow eyes, reflecting what little sunlight filtered down into the canyon. Too high off the ground to be wolves. Too intelligent to be anything natural. They watched me from ledges and crevices in the rock walls. Dozens of them. I ran. Made it back to camp and kept running. Didn't stop until I reached my truck. Drove straight to headquarters and called in everything. FBI, state police, Fish and Wildlife, anyone who would listen. They found the bodies exactly where I'd reported them. The investigation ruled it a pack attack by feral dogs. Case closed. But I knew better. Dogs don't hang bodies from trees. Dogs don't hunt in coordinated patterns. And dogs sure don't watch you with that kind of intelligence burning in their eyes. I kept quiet about what I'd really seen. But I started carrying more than just my usual sidearm when I went into the backcountry, and I started listening to those old stories with a lot more respect. The attacks stopped for 2 weeks after they found the hunters. I almost convinced myself I'd been seeing things. Stress does funny things to your mind, especially after finding 4 dead bodies in one day. Maybe the pack had moved on. Maybe the investigation had scared them off. I should have known better. November 28th. I was checking on a campground near the edge of the gorge when I heard screaming, real screaming, not the kind you hear in movies. This was pure terror. The sound a person makes when they know they're about to die. I followed the sound down a hiking trail that led to a popular overlook, found a young couple, college kids from Eastern Kentucky University. The girl was backed against the safety rail at the cliff edge, pointing at something in the trees. The boy was nowhere to be seen. It took him, she kept saying. It took Danny. It talked to him. I got her calm enough to tell me what happened. They'd been taking pictures at sunset when something called to them from the woods. A voice that sounded exactly like her boyfriend Danny, asking for help. But Danny was standing right next to her. The real Danny went to investigate. That's when she saw it. Something that looked like a huge wolf walking on its back legs, dragging her boyfriend into the trees. She said it turned back to look at her before disappearing, and she swore it smiled. I called for backup and started searching. Found Danny's body a quarter-mile into the forest. Same clean throat wound. But this time, there were other marks. Claw scratches that looked almost like writing carved into a nearby tree. And Danny's camera was missing. The girl kept insisting the thing had spoken. Used Danny's voice to call for help. I wrote it off as shock until I was hiking back to my truck after dark. That's when I heard my own voice calling from the woods. "Samuel," it said, clear as day. "Samuel, I need help. I'm hurt bad." My blood went cold. I was alone on the trail, nobody else around for miles. But there was my voice, coming from somewhere in the black trees, begging for help. I didn't answer, didn't move. Just stood there, listening as my own voice got more desperate, more afraid. After a few minutes, it changed. Got angry. "Samuel," it snarled. And now it didn't sound quite right. Too deep, too rough. "Samuel, don't you want to help yourself?" Then came the laughter, low and mean, echoing through the forest. But it wasn't just one voice laughing. It was several, all using different voices they must have stolen. Men, women, children. All laughing at some joke I wasn't part of. I made it back to my truck and got out of there fast. But as I drove away, I could see eyes reflecting in my headlights, following me through the trees, keeping pace with my truck until I reached the main road. The next morning, I found large paw prints around my house. They circled the building 3 times, then led to my bedroom window. Something had been standing there, looking in while I slept. That's when I knew they weren't just random killers. They were hunting me specifically, and they wanted me to know it. I started staying in town, sleeping at the ranger station instead of my cabin. But it didn't matter. They found me anyway. December 3rd. I was working late, filing reports on the latest incidents. The station was empty except for me. Around midnight, I heard scratching at the back door. Slow, deliberate scratches, like someone trying to get my attention. I grabbed my flashlight and service weapon, went to investigate. The back door was untouched, but there were claw marks in the metal frame. Fresh ones, still bright against the old paint. But the really scary part was what I found when I turned around. Muddy paw prints leading through the station. They came in the front door, which I knew I'd locked. Walked down the hallway. Into my office. Right up to my desk where I'd been sitting. Whatever had made those prints had been standing behind my chair while I worked, watching me, for who knows how long. I followed the prints back outside. They led across the parking lot, then up the side of a building. Impossible for any normal animal. At the top of the wall, carved into the brick, was a message. "Soon, Samuel, very soon." That night, I called my old partner from my state trooper days. Asked him to send me something special from evidence lockup. He didn't ask questions, just said it would arrive in 2 days. I also drove to see Preacher Williams, an old mountain minister who'd been born in these hills. If anyone knew the truth about the local legends, it would be him. "You've seen them, haven't you?" he said, before I could even explain why I'd come. "The changed ones, the pack that hunts with human minds." He told me stories passed down through 5 generations of his family, about soldiers who came back from old wars different, about men who went too deep into dark places and brought something back with them, about curses that spread like disease through mountain families. "They're not animals anymore, Samuel," he said. "But they're not human either. They're caught in between, and that's made them hungry for things animals don't want." He gave me a small bag of blessed silver bullets. "These might help," he said, "but mostly, you need to be smarter than them. They think like people now, but they still have animal weaknesses." I thanked him and went home to wait for my package to arrive. 2 days felt like forever when you know something is stalking you. But I didn't have to wait that long. They came for me the next night. I was loading my truck to leave town when they surrounded me. 6 of them, moving through the shadows between the streetlights like ghosts. In the dim light, they looked like huge wolves, but they moved wrong. Too upright, too coordinated. The largest one stepped into the light, and I saw the truth. It had been a man once. You could see it in the face, even with the wolf features. The scars across its chest and arms looked like old shrapnel wounds. Military tattoos were still visible through the coarse fur. And when it spoke, the voice was human, just roughened by the changed throat. "Hello, Samuel. We've been wanting to meet you properly." I kept my hand near my gun but didn't draw. "Yet. What do you want?" "The same thing you wanted when you were hunting criminals, I imagine." Its yellow eyes gleamed with intelligence. Cruel intelligence. The thrill of a good chase. The satisfaction of a clean kill. "You're murdering innocent people." It laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Innocent? There's no such thing, Ranger. Every person carries guilt for something. We just help them pay for it." The others began to circle me, moving with military precision. Pack tactics, but organized like a squad. The leader continued talking, keeping my attention while they got into position. "Do you know what changed us, Samuel? What made us what we are?" I didn't answer. Was trying to count them all, figure out angles of escape. "Vietnam," it said. 1968. My unit got lost in jungle so thick it never saw sunlight. Found a village that wasn't on any map. The people there were different. Older than they should have been. They offered us food, shelter. Said they could help us survive the war. Its voice got distant, remembering. They kept their promise, made us stronger, faster, gave us senses like gods. Only cost was our humanity. Seemed like a fair trade at the time. "That was over 20 years ago," I said. "Why are you here now?" "Because we're still hungry, and these hills remind us of home. Because hunting animals got boring. Because you smell like the law, and we never did like the law." The circle was getting tighter. I could hear their breathing, see their eyes reflecting the streetlight. My hand moved slowly toward my service weapon. "But mostly," the leader said, "because you've seen us. Really seen us. And we can't let that knowledge spread." That's when I noticed something that gave me hope. They were all focused on me, but they'd positioned themselves under the streetlights. The bright light hurt their eyes. I could see them squinting, blinking more than they should. Preacher Williams had been right about animal weaknesses. "Before you kill me," I said, playing for time, "tell me one thing. How many of you are there?" "Just the 6 of us, for now, but that'll change. Every person we kill the right way, in the right place, has a chance to join us. This pack will grow." "The right way?" Its smile showed too many teeth. "Fear first, real terror. Then the bite. The curse spreads through fear, you see. Your friends, those hunters, they died too quick, no time to change. But you." It stepped closer. "You've been afraid for weeks now, ripe for transformation." I drew my gun and fired at the leader in one smooth motion. The blessed silver bullet caught its center mass, spinning it around with a howl that sounded like a steam engine exploding. Black blood sprayed across the pavement. The others attacked immediately. I dove behind my truck as claws raked the air where my head had been, rolled under the vehicle, and came up on the other side, firing as fast as I could pull the trigger. 2 more went down, but the rest scattered into shadows between buildings. The wounded leader was still alive, crawling toward the storm drains. "You can't kill us all, Samuel," it gasped, "and now you know we're real. The fear will eat you alive." I put another silver bullet in its head. It stopped moving. but the others were still out there. I could hear them calling to each other in voices stolen from their victims. My own voice. Danny's voice. The voices of those dead hunters. I made it to the ranger station and barricaded myself inside, called for backup on the radio, but kept it vague, told them I had armed suspects cornering the building, didn't mention what kind of suspects. The remaining pack members tried to get in through windows and the roof. I heard them talking to each other, making plans like soldiers, but they couldn't break through, and when dawn came, they melted away into the forest. State police arrived an hour later. Found 3 dead wolves in the parking lot, apparently shot during some kind of pack attack. They congratulated me on surviving and recommended I get checked for rabies exposure. I let them believe their version of events. The official report listed it as a wild animal attack. 3 wolves destroyed, 3 others scattered. Recommended increased hunting pressure to control the local population. Case closed. I kept the remaining silver bullets, just in case. 2 weeks later, I put in for transfer to a desk job in Frankfurt. Told them the gorge held too many bad memories after finding those hunters. They understood. Trauma does funny things to people. But before I left, I met with Preacher Williams one more time. "You killed the alpha," he said when I told him what happened. "That'll break up the pack for a while. But not forever. Will they come after me? Maybe. But you've got something they don't expect now. You know what they are. You know how to fight them. That makes you dangerous to them." He gave me more blessed ammunition and a small silver cross. "Keep these close. And Samuel, if you ever hear reports of strange animal attacks in other places where you know there shouldn't be wolves, well, you'll know what's really happening." I took the transfer and spent my remaining years working wildlife management from behind a desk. Safe job, boring job, but at night, I still check the locks twice and keep those silver bullets close. Every few months, I get calls from other rangers, stories about impossible animal attacks, coordinated pack behavior, victims found in places no wolf should be able to reach. I listen politely and suggest they contact Fish and Wildlife about problem predators. But I also send them Preacher Williams' address. Sometimes old knowledge is the only thing that stands between civilization and the hungry dark. The Red River Gorge is still beautiful. Tourists still visit the natural arches and waterfalls. Hikers still camp under the stars. Most of them never see anything worse than a black bear or a curious coyote. But some do. Some come back with stories about voices calling from the woods, about eyes watching from impossible places, about things that walk like men but hunt like wolves. The Park Service files these under stress-related incidents or wildlife encounters. The witnesses usually get transferred to other positions, quieter positions, because some truths are too dangerous to believe, even when they're hunting you. My name is Samuel Thornton, and I spent 19 years protecting people in Daniel Boone National Forest. I did my job, kept the peace, followed the rules. But some things don't follow rules. They follow older laws, hungrier laws, and they're still out there in the dark between the trees, waiting for the next person who strays too far from the light. If you ever find yourself camping in remote hills, listen to the sounds around you. Really listen. If you hear voices calling for help, voices that sound like people you know, don't answer. Just run. And whatever you do, don't look back at the eyes watching from the shadows. Some hungers are patient. Some hungers can wait, but they never stop being hungry. My name is Elizabeth Duncan, and I've been a forest ranger for 14 years. People think my job is just about stopping campfires and giving directions to lost hikers. They're wrong. Sometimes, we find things in the woods that don't belong in any nature book. I work in the Cranberry Wilderness, deep in West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. It's the kind of place where cell phones don't work, and the nearest road is miles away. The trees here are older than America itself. Giant red spruces that were growing when Columbus was still learning to walk. Between them lie sphagnum bogs, wet and spongy ground that feels like walking on a giant's pillow. I have a PhD in environmental science, which sounds fancy but really just means I know a lot about dirt, water, and why plants die. My specialty is bog ecosystems, those weird, wet places where pitcher plants eat bugs and the water is brown as tea. Most people think bogs are ugly. I think they're magical. Until 3 weeks ago, I thought the old Celtic stories about green men and tree shepherds were just nonsense that Scottish settlers brought over the ocean. My grandmother used to tell me those tales when I was little. Stories about forest guardians who protected the woods from people who meant harm. I'd roll my eyes and tell her science didn't work that way. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in August 1993. The weather had turned cold overnight, which was weird for summer. Thick mist hung between the trees like smoke, and everything felt too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. I was hiking to check on a research station where 3 scientists had been studying the bog chemistry. Dr. Sarah Chen, Dr. Michael Torres, and graduate student Jenny Walsh had been out there for 2 weeks, taking water samples and measuring plant growth. They were supposed to radio in every 3 days. It had been 6 days since their last call. The hike took me 3 hours through muddy trails and around fallen logs. My backpack was heavy with emergency supplies and a satellite phone. The whole time, something felt off. The forest was too still, like it was holding its breath. When I finally reached the research camp, the first thing I noticed was that the generator was still running. That was good. It meant the equipment was working and the samples were still cold. The bad news was that nobody came out to greet me. "Hello?" I called out. "Sarah? Michael?" Nothing. Their tents were still set up in a neat triangle around the equipment station. The coffee pot was half full but cold. Someone's journal lay open on a folding table, pages fluttering in the breeze. Everything looked normal except for one thing. There were no people. I checked their GPS coordinates on my map. They were exactly where they were supposed to be. Their truck was parked at the trailhead, so they hadn't driven anywhere. Their gear was all accounted for. Sleeping bags, clothes, food, scientific instruments. Even their toothbrushes were still in the camping bathroom kit. It was like they had just vanished into thin air. I picked up the open journal from the table. It belonged to Jenny, the grad student. Her handwriting was usually neat, but the last few entries looked rushed and shaky. August 5th. Water samples showing impossible nutrient levels. Nitrogen and phosphorus readings are off the charts. Dr. Chen says the equipment must be broken, but we've tested it 3 times. August 6th. Found a dead deer this morning, but it wasn't rotting. Instead, it was covered in moss and new plant growth, like the forest was eating it from the outside. Dr. Torres took pictures. August 7th. The trees are moving. I know that sounds crazy, but I swear I saw a big spruce change position overnight. Michael thinks I'm losing it. Maybe I am. The last entry was dated August 8th, just 1 day ago. The green men are real. Sarah was right about the old stories. They're coming for us. If anyone finds this, stay away from the bog. They don't like strangers. The rest of the page was blank. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the strange August cold. Jenny was a smart girl, studying for her master's degree in botany. She wasn't the type to believe in fairy tales or write scary stories in her research journal. But people didn't just disappear. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe they had gotten lost on a hike, maybe someone got hurt and the others went for help. Maybe they found something interesting and forgot to radio in. I walked around the camp looking for clues. Their equipment was still running. Machines that measured air quality, soil temperature, and water chemistry. The computers showed data being collected right up until this morning. Everything was working perfectly. Too perfectly. That's when I noticed the plants. The vegetation around the research station looked wrong. Not dying. The opposite. Everything was too green, too healthy, too big. Ferns that should have been knee-high reached up to my chest. Moss-covered rocks and tree trunks in thick, bright green blankets. Even the grass seemed taller and more lush than it should be in late summer. I pulled out my pH testing kit and took a water sample from the nearest bog pool. The reading came back impossible, pH 4.2, which was acidic enough to burn skin. But bog water was supposed to be acidic. What wasn't supposed to happen was the nitrogen levels. My portable spectrometer showed nitrogen concentrations that were literally off the scale. It was like someone had dumped 100 pounds of fertilizer into a few acres of wetland. In nature, That much nitrogen would take decades to accumulate naturally. What the hell, I muttered, taking another sample. Same result. I tried a third sample from a different pool. The numbers were even higher. Either my equipment was broken, or this bog had become the most nutrient-rich ecosystem on the planet overnight. Neither option made sense. I set up my own small camp next to the research station and spent the afternoon running tests. Every measurement came back wrong. The soil was too fertile, the water was too rich. Even the air showed strange chemical signatures that my instruments couldn't identify. As the sun started to set, I found Dr. Torres's camera in his tent. I scrolled through the photos on the digital display, looking for clues about what they had discovered. The early pictures showed normal research work, scientists taking samples, measuring plants, setting up equipment. But as I clicked through the images, they got stranger. There was the dead deer Jenny had mentioned, but in the photo it looked even weirder than she described. The animal was completely covered in green growth, not just moss, but tiny trees and flowering plants growing right out of its fur and skin. It looked like the deer had become a garden. The next photos showed trees that seemed to be in different positions from day to day. Dr. Torres had been careful to photograph the same locations for comparison, and the pictures clearly showed large spruces that had somehow moved several feet between shots. The last photo made my hands shake. It showed something standing between two trees at the edge of camp. At first glance, it looked like a person in a green coat. But when I zoomed in on the camera's small screen, I could see it wasn't a person at all. The figure was tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, and made entirely of bark and moss and leaves. It had arms and legs like a human, but they were thick and twisted like tree branches. Its face was just a suggestion of features made from knots in the wood and patches of different colored moss. And it was looking directly at the camera. I dropped the camera back on the sleeping bag and backed out of the tent. The sun was almost down now, and the mist was getting thicker. The forest around me felt different than it had that morning, more alive, but not in a good way. Every tree seemed to be watching me. I tried to radio for help, but got nothing but static. The satellite phone showed no signal. Even my GPS was having trouble finding satellites. It was like the forest was blocking all communication with the outside world. That's when I heard the sounds. At first, it was just creaking, the normal noise trees make in the wind. But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. The creaking was coming from all around me, like every tree in the forest was slowly stretching and moving. Then I heard footsteps. Not human footsteps. These were heavy and slow, like someone walking in wooden shoes. They seemed to come from multiple directions at once, circling my camp in the growing darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the nearest sound. The beam showed nothing but trees and mist. But when I listened carefully, the footsteps stopped exactly when my light hit them, and started again when I pointed it somewhere else. Something was out there, multiple somethings, and they knew I was watching. I spent that night sitting with my back against the equipment station, flashlight in one hand and emergency radio in the other. The footsteps continued all night, sometimes close, sometimes far away, but never stopping completely. Every hour, I tried the radio and satellite phone. Nothing worked. When morning finally came, I found new evidence that made my scientific training feel useless. There were tracks around my camp, but not animal tracks. These looked like someone had walked around my tent in bare feet, except the footprints were made of moss. Actual moss, growing in the shape of human feet, complete with toes. More disturbing was what had happened to the research station. All the scientific equipment was still running, but the readings had changed overnight. The chemical signatures in the bog water were now completely different, like the entire ecosystem had transformed while I slept. And there was something new growing next to the equipment station. Where there had been bare ground the day before, a circle of small trees had sprouted overnight. Not saplings, these were full-sized trees, 3 feet tall, growing in a perfect ring around the spot where the scientists had been doing their work. Trees don't grow 3 feet tall overnight. Trees don't grow in perfect circles. Trees don't grow in soil that was tested and measured just 24 hours earlier. But these trees were there, real, solid, impossible trees. I walked around the circle, examining each one. They were baby spruces, but they looked ancient, like tiny versions of the 500-year-old giants that surrounded us. Their bark was thick and gnarled, their needles dark green and healthy. In the center of the circle, something was growing up from the moss. It looked like a hand. I dropped to my knees next to the thing growing from the moss. It definitely looked like a human hand, but it was made of roots and bark instead of flesh and bone. The fingers were long and twisted like small branches, and they seemed to be reaching up from deep underground. My first thought was that it was some kind of weird fungus or root system that just happened to look like a hand. But when I touched it with my finger, the wooden fingers moved. I jerked my hand back and fell backward onto the wet moss. The wooden hand continued moving, slowly opening and closing like it was trying to grab something. That's when I heard a voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere, like the forest itself was speaking. The words were in English, but they sounded old and hollow, like wind through dead trees. "Where are the others?" I looked around frantically, trying to find who was talking. The voice came again, clearer this time. "You smell like them. Where are the poison makers?" "I don't know what you mean," I said to the empty forest, feeling stupid for talking to trees. The hand in the moss opened wider, and I saw that the palm wasn't empty. There was something small and white lying in the wooden fingers. I leaned closer to get a better look. It was a tooth, a human tooth, still white and clean. I scrambled backward, my heart pounding. The tooth belonged to someone. Maybe Dr. Chen, or Dr. Torres, or Jenny. The thought made me sick. "What did you do to them?" I shouted at the forest. The answer came not in words, but in action. The trees around me began to move. It started slowly. A large spruce near the edge of camp leaned to one side, its roots pulling up from the ground with wet, sucking sounds. Another tree, maybe 30 feet away, twisted around to face me directly. Then I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't trees at all. They were creatures that looked like trees. The nearest one stood up fully, and I realized it was at least 12 feet tall. Its body was made of dark bark and bright green moss. But it had the basic shape of a person: 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with something that might have been a face. Tiny branches stuck out from its arms and back like twisted hair. Its eyes were knots in the wood that seemed to glow with their own light. More of them stood up around my camp. I counted 5, then 7, then stopped counting and focused on not running away, screaming. The closest one took a step toward me. When its foot hit the ground, I felt the vibration through the wet moss. Small plants sprouted up around its footprint, growing so fast I could see them getting taller by the second. "You test the water," it said in that hollow, windy voice. "You measure our blood." I forced myself to stand up, even though my knees were shaking. These things, tree shepherds, I guessed, were upset about something the research team had been doing. "We're just studying the bog," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We want to understand the ecosystem, to protect it." The creature that had spoken tilted its head, like it was thinking. Moss and small ferns shifted on its bark skin. "Protect," it said. "You poison the water with your machines. You steal our essence in bottles." Behind it, the other tree shepherds moved closer. They didn't walk like humans. Their movements were slow and flowing, like trees swaying in a breeze, but they were definitely getting closer. "We don't poison anything," I said. "We just take small samples to test them. We put the water back." The lead creature made a sound like wind through pine needles. It might have been laughter, but it didn't sound friendly. "Small," it said. "You take our life force drop by drop, day by day. You measure our strength to find our weaknesses." One of the other tree shepherds stepped forward and held up its hand. In its wooden palm were 3 objects that made my stomach drop. Dr. Chen's glasses, Dr. Torres's watch, Jenny's university ID card. "Where are they?" I demanded, anger overriding my fear. "What did you do to them?" The tree shepherd with the personal items gestured toward the bog with its other hand. I followed its gaze and saw something that made me understand why the water chemistry had been so wrong. There were shapes under the water, human shapes. At first I thought they were just floating bodies, which would have been horrible enough. But as I stared, I realized the shapes were changing. The bog water around them was bubbling and churning, and green tendrils were growing up and around the submerged forms. The researchers weren't dead. They were being digested. fed to the bog like fertilizer to help the forest grow. You monsters, I screamed, pulling out my radio and trying desperately to get a signal. They were scientists. They were trying to help. The lead tree shepherd moved faster than I expected. One moment, it was 10 feet away. The next moment, its wooden hand was wrapped around my wrist. Its grip was strong enough to crush bone, but it held me gently, like it didn't want to hurt me yet. "Help," it said, bringing its face close to mine. Up close, I could see that its eyes were actually holes in the bark, filled with some kind of glowing sap. "Your kind has been helping for 300 years. Cutting, burning, poisoning, taking." The tree shepherd lifted me off the ground with one hand, holding me at eye level. Its breath smelled like deep forest, earth and moss and rotting leaves. "We are the guardians," it continued. "We have protected this place since before your ancestors crossed the great water. We will not let you destroy what remains." "I'm not trying to destroy anything," I said, struggling in its grip. "I protect forests too. It's my job." The creature studying me, tilting its head back and forth like a bird. The other tree shepherds gathered around us in a circle, their glowing sap eyes all focused on me. "Show us," the leader said finally. It lowered me back to the ground but didn't let go of my wrist. With its other hand, it pointed toward the bog where the researchers' bodies were still dissolving in the acidic water. "Prove that you are different from the others." I knew this was my only chance. If I couldn't convince these tree shepherds that I was truly committed to protecting the forest, I'd end up like Dr. Chen and the others, slowly dissolving in bog water to feed the ecosystem I'd spent my career studying. "Let me show you my work," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Let me prove that not all humans are destroyers." The lead tree shepherd loosened its grip slightly but didn't let go. The others moved closer, their bark faces impossible to read. I pointed toward my backpack with my free hand. "In there. Maps and reports. 15 years of conservation work." The creature nodded to one of the others, who retrieved my pack and dumped the contents onto the moss. Papers scattered everywhere. Research reports, wilderness area maps, legal documents, photographs. "This is the Cranberry Wilderness Protection Plan," I said, pointing to a thick folder. "I've spent 5 years fighting to expand the protected area by another 10,000 acres. No logging, no mining, no development." The tree shepherds studied the papers, passing them between their wooden hands with surprising gentleness. They couldn't read human writing, but they seemed to understand maps and photographs. I pointed to a series of photos showing clear-cut mountainsides. I documented illegal logging operations and got them shut down. 3 companies were arrested because of my work. One of the tree shepherds held up a photo of a healthy forest canopy. Its sap eyes glowed brighter. "This section was scheduled to be cut down for a parking lot," I continued. "I spent 2 years in court fighting the development. Now it's permanently protected." The lead creature finally released my wrist. It picked up one of my maps, a hand-drawn chart showing every endangered plant species in the Cranberry Wilderness. "You know the rare ones," it said, tracing the map with a wooden finger. "You watch the places where they grow. It's my job to protect them," I said. "The bog turtles, the cheat mountain salamanders, the flying squirrels. I've dedicated my life to keeping them safe." The tree shepherd looked at me for a long moment. Around us, the other guardians whispered to each other in voices like rustling leaves. "Your scientists, friends," the leader said finally. "They were not protectors." "What do you mean?" "We listened to their words. They spoke of mining permits, tourism, development. They measured our strength to see how much damage we could resist." I felt sick. That's not possible. They were researching bog chemistry for conservation purposes. The tree shepherd reached into the moss at its feet and pulled up a waterproof folder I hadn't noticed before. It contained papers with Dr. Chen's handwriting, but not research notes. These were contracts and correspondence with mining companies. As I read through the documents, my heart sank. Dr. Chen had been collecting data not to protect the bog, but to find the best places to extract rare earth minerals from the soil. The chemical analysis, the water samples, the soil surveys, it was all prep work for industrial mining. They lied, I whispered. They lied to everyone. They lied to us as well, the tree shepherd said. They promised to take only small samples. Instead, they planned to take everything. I understood now why the bog chemistry had been so rich in minerals. The tree shepherds had been concentrating nutrients here for centuries, creating the perfect conditions for their forest to thrive. Dr. Chen had discovered this and seen dollar signs instead of natural wonder. But I didn't know, I said desperately. I thought they were legitimate researchers. We know, the leader said. We can taste truth in the air around you. Your words match your heart. The circle of tree shepherds stepped back, giving me more space. But they didn't leave. However, the leader continued. You have seen us now. You know our secret. We cannot let you carry this knowledge back to your world. My heart started racing again. What does that mean? Buge. It means you have a choice. The tree shepherd said, join your friends in feeding the bog. Or become our ally, help us protect this place from others. Like your scientist friends, be our eyes and ears in the human world. I looked around at the ancient forest, at these impossible guardians who had been protecting it for centuries, at the bog where 3 people had died because of greed disguised as science. What would I have to do? The lead tree shepherd gestured toward the research equipment still humming away at the station. First, destroy the evidence. Make it appear that 2 your friends had an accident. No one must know we exist. And then you continue your work as before. But when others come who mean harm to this place, you warn us. You find ways to stop them before they can do damage. How will I contact you? The tree shepherd reached out and touched my forehead with one wooden finger. I felt a strange tingling sensation, like electricity running through my brain. Now, you are marked, it said. When you need us, place your hand on any old tree and speak our name. We will hear you. What is your name? We are the shepherds of the first growth. We are the memory of the forest before your kind came. We are the guardians of what remains. The marking on my forehead felt warm and alive. I touched it with my fingers and felt something like bark growing on my skin. Is this permanent? As long as you keep your promise to us, the mark will remain invisible to other humans. If you betray us. The tree shepherd didn't finish the sentence. It didn't need to. I won't betray you, I said. This forest is as important to me as it is to you. Then, begin. It took me 6 hours to destroy the evidence and stage the accident. The hardest part was watching the tree shepherds dissolve the equipment in bog acid, erasing any trace of the illegal mining research. The computer hard drives melted like ice in summer heat. I used the emergency radio to call for a search and rescue team, reporting that I'd found the research station abandoned with signs of a struggle. I told them it looked like the scientists had fallen through weak bog ice while collecting samples. A believable accident in these dangerous wetlands. The official investigation lasted 3 days. I guided the search teams to all the wrong areas, making sure they never got close to where the tree shepherds lived. Eventually, the case was closed as an accidental drowning with bodies unrecovered. Not unusual in bog country, where the acidic water can dissolve organic matter completely. The Cranberry Wilderness Research Station was officially decommissioned due to structural instability and unsafe bog conditions. No one would be permitted to conduct research there again without special authorization that I knew would never be granted. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I've thrown myself into conservation work with an energy that surprised my supervisors. I've successfully blocked 2 more development projects, expanded the wilderness protection area by 8,000 acres, and convinced the state to classify the cranberry bog ecosystem as critically endangered. Every few weeks, I hike back into the deep forest to check on my unusual allies. The tree shepherds are always watching, always protecting their ancient home. They've shown me secrets of the forest that no human has ever seen. Caves full of crystal formations, groves where trees grow in impossible spirals, springs that bubble with water so pure it glows faintly in the dark. In return, I keep their secret and guard against threats they can't see coming. Last month, I intercepted permits for a scientific survey that was actually cover for oil exploration. The permits mysteriously disappeared from the filing system, and the company decided to focus their efforts in other states. The mark on my forehead never shows, but I can feel it sometimes when I'm deep in the forest, a warm spot that tingles when the tree shepherds are nearby. They've never spoken to me again, but I know they're watching, protecting, waiting. People ask me sometimes why I've become so passionate about wilderness conservation lately. They think maybe I had some kind of breakthrough experience in the forest, some moment that changed my perspective on nature. They're not wrong, I just can't tell them what really happened. Because some secrets are worth keeping. Some places are worth protecting at any cost. And some guardians have been doing their job far longer than we've even known they existed. The forest remembers everything. The forest protects its own. And now, whether they know it or not, the tree shepherds protect me too. My name is Elizabeth Duncan, and I've been a forest ranger for 14 years. I thought my job was about protecting nature from people. Now I know it's about protecting people from nature, and protecting nature from people like me used to be. The balance is delicate, ancient, necessary, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it's maintained.